Um, well, thank you all so much for being here. Um, my name is Chelsea Silva. I'm with River Network, and I manage our Colorado Watershed Planning Peer Learning Network. And this Flows training series is sort of a sub focus that's part of this peer learning network. And you're here at our fourth and final call in this series. Um, and this series is really aimed at helping to share out topics that we covered in a pilot flows cohort program that wrapped up back in June. And it's really aimed at bringing those topics and resources out into our broader network and giving you a chance to hear from the experts who are leading on various topics, and then learn from practitioners who have been able to implement those tools in real life. So that's what we'll do today. Um, Today's focus is on flow restoration tools, and I'll share more about our speakers in just a little bit. For today's chat or call, please use the chat box for your questions. Our group's not that big, so when we get to the Q&A portions, feel free to come off mute if that's a little easier for you to ask your questions, but it does make it a little easier for me as a facilitator to track who asked the question first if you use the chat box. So please utilize that tool. And if you've been in one of my calls before with River Network, you know that we really value your input. So we have a very short evaluation form at the end of this call that we'd appreciate you filling out to tell us how we did and help us improve our calls into the future. We have a few group agreements today. So the first is be present. You took the time to register for this call and you came on, video. So we'd love for you to try to minimize the use of your email and your phone while you're on our call. Be here and learn with us. It just makes it a much more fruitful conversation if we can all participate and be fully present. The second group agreement is to respect our diversity. So we all come to this space with different backgrounds and experiences, and we embrace those differences and leverage them to learn from one another. The third is to listen, to understand, and respond with curiosity. And this really gets at the idea of not putting your guard up right away when someone might say something that you disagree with. So listen and challenge yourself to try to hear what people say before you respond. And finally, take space, make space. If you find that you're the only one asking questions, maybe hold off on firing off your next question and give somebody else a chance to enter into the chat and ask their questions, because we all learn at different paces and we want to hear from as many of you as we can today. I have a few slides to go through before I pass it to our speakers. I wanted to share with you that our Watershed Planning Peer Learning Network is open to anyone in Colorado who's working on watershed planning or hoping to work on planning. We bring together our peers to work through challenges, solve problems, offer tools and resources, including many that are posted on our website, coloradosmp.org. And we'd love to have you. So if you're not already part of our network, we welcome you to join. I'll provide a link for you to join later. We have some upcoming events with the network. The first is our peer call on basin roundtables on December 11th. So during this call, we'll hear from Jeff Rodriguez with Colorado Water Conservation Board and also Carrie Paget with Harris Water Engineering, and they'll share about what the purpose of those roundtables are and how you can get engaged. And this is really important, particularly at this point, because the roundtables are sort of moving into a phase where they're starting to chart their path forward by updating their implementation plans. So you want to make sure that your values are represented in those plans. So check that out. And also, River Network is leading a 10-year memo on watershed planning in the coming months. So if you're leading watershed planning in Colorado, expect a call or email from us, because we want to hear from you on how planning has been going for you in the last 5 years and what we can do to support you moving forward. Speaking of the roundtables, River Network is partnering with CWCB to do some presentations around the state focused on watershed planning gaps and opportunities. And we would love to have you join us to not only be there and enjoy each other's presence, but also to learn about what we're doing and meet your roundtables if you don't already engage with them. River Network right now is offering support services to anybody doing planning or implementation on watersheds throughout the state. So we have a request form for you to fill out. We offer technical consultations, organizational support, and facilitation consultations. So please reach out. We can provide a little help along the way as you're working on your plans, and we really hope to hear from those of you who we haven't heard from yet. We've had some good requests, but we'd love to hear from more of you. Okay, this one I'm really excited about. So we as River Network, like I mentioned, worked with Colorado Water Trust and Western Resource Advocates to host a pilot flows cohort program over the last year. And we're hoping to do another one that will be modified and changed based off of what we learned in the first one. And I have an interest form here to hear from you if you're interested in this kind of program, which will walk you through the technical and stakeholder aspects of doing flows related projects in your communities, and also give you a chance to get some technical support from a team of consultants. So the hope is that the program would start in August of next year. We'd walk you through the training and give you the base foundation of what you need to know to do flows projects in the first part of the program. And then after that, move into helping you move through capstone projects where you outline your goals, objectives, and actions to get you to implement those projects in your communities. So we're just right now at the stage of collecting interest and learning about whether or not this sounds like something you'd want to do. So once I get these forms into the chat, please fill them out. Just a few more slides from me. If you didn't know already, River Network is a national organization, and every 2 years we host River Rally, which is a space for building community with water, justice, and river advocates. Next year, we will host it in San Antonio, Texas, and we're at the stage of collecting input from people who want to attend Rally and want to shape what it looks like. So please, we'd love to have you at Rally. If you've never been, it's an amazing conference-like experience. And the more input we can get from you, the more we can shape it to be Colorado-centric in Texas. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to our speakers, but first I wanted to thank our sponsors, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, Western Resource Advocates, St. Vrain and Left Hand Water Conservancy District, the Walton Family Foundation, and Mighty Arrow Family Foundation, all helped to make this series happen, and the cohort that I mentioned before. So thank you to those sponsors. So for today's call, I'm going to first pass it to Tony LaGreca with Colorado Water Trust, who will walk through the tools that they use to work on flow restoration throughout the state. We'll have a Q&A for Tony's presentation, and then Tony and Rebecca Briesmoore with the Colorado River District will have a dialogue about a project they worked on together called the Vail Ditch Water Conservation Program. They'll talk about what made the program effective, how to scale it, strengths and challenges, and then long-term impacts. And we'll also have a Q&A for that piece. So with that, I am going to pass it to Tony.
There we go. I had to find my audio button. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming, and glad to have you all here. I have about 30 minutes of presentation about tools that you can use to help kind of boost flows in the state of Colorado, and tools that we use and tools that other folks will use. And we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So without much further ado, I will get that thing up on the screen, hopefully. Let's see. Are folks seeing my slides?
Yes.
All right, and then I'm going to put it into presenter mode, which hopefully is also showing up.
Yep.
Excellent. All right. So, um, yeah, I'm just going to run through kind of a laundry list of potential tools that you could use to help improve flows in Colorado and talk about some pros and cons. Quick, kind of before we get started, who is the Colorado Water Trust? I know a lot of you in this call, and I know you know us, but for those of you who don't, we are a nonprofit organization. We work statewide to restore flows to Colorado's rivers. We were formed in 2001, so we're coming up on our 25th anniversary. And the idea was that we were to partner with and add capacity to the state's in-stream flow program to help amplify its work. We work with the water users all across the state to put together voluntary transactions to benefit the environment. And that's super key. We only work with folks who want to work with us. We don't have any authority to make anything happen on the stream. It's all about our partners. Our transactions are tailored for each water right and each water stream. We like to think of ourselves as sort of like a custom water project shop. We look at the needs of the stream, we look at the needs of the water user, and we look at the tools available, and we try to come up with a project that is going to be win-win for everyone out there. So, super important. We work within the prior appropriation system, and we compensate water right owners at fair market value if that's something that they want. We don't have any special tools. We don't have any like magical dispensation from prior appropriation and state water law. We work very strictly within it. We employ several attorneys that help us make sure that our projects are um, meeting the letter of the law. We have successfully implemented 28 projects across the state, adding nearly 100,000 acre feet of water. We're going to hit 100,000 acre feet next year. So that's a pretty big deal. 600 miles of stream have benefited from flows that we've put out there. Okay, so enough about us. Let's talk about the tools. So I kind of have a couple sections here. There are tools that you can use to boost flows that don't really have a lot of protection for those flows and sometimes protection for the water users. But we'll go through these because they can produce benefits to the stream. So we have infrastructure improvements, efficiency improvements, non-diversion and retiming agreements, water conservation programs, which I will actually kind of leave out of this presentation and talk about in the next presentation, and reservoir releases. So infrastructure improvements are exactly what they sound like. If you have diversion infrastructure and you can improve it to say keep it from leaking or or not take as much water, maybe add a wasteway channel to allow water to return back to the stream if you can't control how much water you're actually taking through your head gate. Those sort of things can help keep flows in the rivers. A couple of great examples. Abrams Creek, this is a TU project. Actually, both of these are Trout Unlimited projects, so no credit for us. Abrams Creek in the Eagle drainage had a diversion very high up in the system that had an extremely leaky ditch, and that and the ditch users and the stream below that ditch was cutthroat stream, very important cutthroat stream, and so TU worked to find funding to help line and pipe the ditch for the water users, saving about 40%. They had, like I said, extremely leaky ditch and saving about 40%. And that allowed them to reduce their diversions from Abrams Creek and still get the water that they needed to run their operation. So 40% of that water was now could stay in the stream and help the fish in Abrams Creek. And the CWCB actually appropriated a new in-stream flow decree in Abrams Creek to kind of keep that water for the fish. Steuben Creek, another Trout Unlimited project, consisted of two diversions, and one diversion would feed water over to another diversion and eventually to a storage reservoir. And they were able to improve the diversion closest to the reservoir to where it would be reliable and provide enough water for the water user, that they were allowed to dismantle the second diversion, the further upstream diversion, and that kept water in a much longer stretch of the river running on down the stream. Again, it's a cutthroat stream. But these projects are really great. They have a big impact where they're at. They're usually, these types of projects don't have like a big scalability. You're not providing water to, tens and tens of CFS to, 50 miles of stream. It's very local. It's very focused. They can be expensive. One of the things is the water that's left in by these is not always protected. It is in the case of Abrams Creek, but in Steuben Creek, if somebody else wanted to come in and put in a diversion, that water is not protected. That was left in stream. So that's some of the drawbacks that you can have from these projects. Efficiency improvements. So crop switching is something that um, is always being looked at and has some really interesting potential. I think one of the biggest examples is the Nature Conservancy on the Verde River in Arizona was paying and working with irrigators to switch crops from alfalfa, which is a pretty thirsty crop that also grows at the thirstiest time of the year when the river is in the most stress, over to barley. Barley, which doesn't consume as much water and also has an earlier growing season, so it wasn't putting stress on the river at a time when everybody else was who was growing alfalfa. So it sort of retimed the diversion need. Um, Kernza is an example. There's, folks who are looking at something like Kernza that can have maybe up to 30% less consumptive use. And so all of these things, if you're using less water at the downstream end of your ditch, then potentially that water can be left in stream and can be helping your stream out. But then you have some questions. Is there a market? The Nature Conservancy built a malting house so that they could sell the barley that they were producing, because otherwise nobody wanted to buy it. That's quite an investment, and not necessarily something everyone can do. Um, you can't protect water in the state of Colorado that was left in stream for efficiency. If somebody has a more efficient system and they're just not diverting as much water as they used to, that water is available for the next downstream user or for a new user to appropriate. Um, it also doesn't protect the user. So a water user may crop switch or get more efficient irrigation systems, and they may say, okay, well, now I'm reducing my diversions. Well, potentially when the HCU analysis comes along, if they ever want to do a change or something like that, they are going to have reduced numbers on their diversion record. And so as long as the use is still there, then they should be okay, but it's not necessarily like they're going to see a reduction in the diversion numbers, which has the potential to impact their HCU numbers. I'll just put it that way. I touched on it a little bit, but efficient irrigation, changing from flood to sprinkler can be, can change your irrigation efficiency from 50% of the water you put on your field is used for, is consumed by the crop to up to 70% of it. So that can be a really valuable tool. The picture on the bottom right is, I think, along the Yampa River, and it's Trout Unlimited again. Installed a lot of big guns on a ranch to change from a flood irrigation system to a sprinkler system, and they saw pretty good consumption reductions. But again, they can't protect that water in stream, so they have to be picky and choosy about where you do this and what it's going to benefit. And there is not necessarily anything stopping, say, that particular rancher from selling, another rancher coming in and saying, well, I'm going back to flood irrigation. It's not necessarily a long-term solution for that area. So a lot of positives, potential drawbacks. And you'll see that with all of these, except for, well, non-diversion agreements. Non-diversion agreements are simply working with a water user who's diverting off the river in a place where, a place in a time where you've identified that you have some flow needs or you some flow stress. And it's very quickly a legal lease and saying, we are going to pay you money to not divert. And you can execute one of those tomorrow if you have fast lawyers. I don't know, most people don't have that fast of lawyers, but um, you can execute them pretty quickly. Someone closes their head gate, that water stays in the river. Boom, you have restored flows to that section of the river. You've kept the piece flowing. However, if you don't go into any other steps that I'll talk about with some of our other projects, that water is not protected in the river. Now, that water, if it goes 100 yards downstream and just hits the next head gate, well, then it's gone. It's gone back out of the river again. And then there's no protection for water users in that scenario. If they stop diverting just because of a lease agreement that you may have with them, then that's a zero on their record, and that's a zero that's going to remain on their record and potentially lead to questions of abandonment or lead to a diminishment of their historic consumptive use if they were to ever go for a change case. A little bit of different agreement is retiming agreement. So with our rivers and streams, I kind of talked about it with the Verde down in Arizona. There are times when our rivers and streams are at their lowest and the heat is at its highest for warming up the river, and that's tough on fish. Um, if you can change the timing of how someone operates their irrigation season or their diversion structure, then you can potentially leave water in the river at a time when it's most needed in the river, and you can use water at a time when it's less of a problem, when it's not as critical to have that water in the river. A great example of this, Trout Unlimited, you'll see their name pop up a lot. They're good folks. The TU Winter Flows program down in the Rio Grande Basin is very much specifically looking at ways with reservoirs in the headwaters of the Rio Grande. When irrigation season is over, they largely and historically have just shut the head gates almost entirely, and leading to really low flows downstream of all of these reservoirs. And that can be extremely detrimental for fish. We always talk about summertime and the heat, but fish in the winter, if you have ice that if you have not enough water, ice will just freeze solid all the way to the bottom of the river. Obviously not good for fish. So TU pays irrigators to either reduce or not take their diversions during the heat of the summer that would be coming out of one of these reservoirs. And instead, it gets stored up in the reservoir, and then they ask for that water to come down as stock water in the winter. So that's a way that TU is working to improve wintertime stream flows. Reservoir releases for decreed uses. This is another tool that you can use and one that we use. The idea is that if you have a reservoir that you can lease water out of, but not for an in-stream flow use, but more for another decreed use, such as irrigation. So in the sort of sketch example here, there's a municipality taking 60 CFS out of the river, and a little ways downstream there is an irrigator taking 20 CFS. And if they were to do that, it would only leave 20 CFS in the river. If you felt like that stretch of river needed more water than that, you could lease that 20 CFS out of a reservoir upstream, have them release it, and thereby you're covering that irrigation use, leaving that 40 CFS in the river, and helping keep the river flowing higher than it would be. But you're using it for irrigation and not for in-stream flow. We have a project, it's one of our big ones, a 15-mile reach environmental release project, where we really lease water from Rudai Reservoir, send it down to the Orchard Mesa, the roller dam at Cameo. Orchard Mesa Irrigation Company takes that water, runs it through the turbines of their power station. And then when the water comes out at the end of their power station right here, if you can see my cursor, I'm not sure if you can, but on the top left, water comes out of that power station that happens to be the top of the 15-mile reach, which is the sort of critical habitat for the endangered species in the Grand Valley. So our water goes all the way down to Cameo, goes through their turbines. We lease it to them for hydropower purposes, and then it goes back in the river and boosts flows to the fish in need. I'm going to keep going a little bit. So tools to boost and protect in-stream flow. These are tools authorized by the state in 73 and the state authorized the CWCB to either appropriate or acquire flows for the in-stream. So appropriations, most of you, if you've been on this series, saw the great presentation about ISF appropriation. So I'm not going to spend much time on that. Where the Water Trust works is in the acquisition side. This is where we work with water users to lease or purchase water that we can then use in priority in the stream. If you'll remember, these new ISF appropriations have very junior dates, right? And so when we go and we acquire water rights, we can take them through processes to keep that priority time, keep that priority date, and protect that water in stream in priority. So it has a lot more power. It can move further. It won't just get taken by the next downstream user. So a couple of tools we have: acquisition and just a full-on water rights change. This tool is not our most popular because it's really intensive, but our first project was the Peabody Ditch. It was a rancher on the Blue River north of Silverthorne who was like, I'm moving to Mexico. I'm not ranching. I'm selling my land to the Forest Service and selling my water to the Water Trust. That was his retirement plan. So the Colorado Water Trust took those water rights through water court, and we got them permanently changed to, instead of irrigation, in-stream flow. And so every year, the water that would have gone out at this head gate just stays in Boulder Creek and flows on down to the Blue River and helps keep that river system healthy and happy. We don't get many projects like this. We have a few, but most of the time people are not just getting rid of their water rights. So some other ways these can work is we have a project on the Little Cimarron where we actually own shares in a ditch. The Colorado Water Trust purchased and owned shares in a ditch. And we went and got the first and only split season decree to allow for irrigation use in the early season when the river's running high and healthy, and in-stream flow use in the late summer and fall when the flows are historically pretty low. So this is one where the water's not permanently taken off the land. It's actually permanently in a split season operation where the water can be used for irrigation in part of the season and in-stream flow for another part of the season. And you'll see that in some other tools that we have as well. 5 and 10 temporary loans. So this is another tool from the state statutes that is authorized by the state statutes, and it allows for a 5 and 10-year operation of an existing water right for in-stream flow. And so, we work with a water user, we develop a lease, we develop an application with for the CWCB, and then ultimately for the Division of Water Resources that says we're not going to use this water on the ground for irrigation or in the city for municipal use, but we're going to use it for in-stream flow. And this is like a substitute water supply plan, for those of you who know what that is. It is like an administrative change of water, allowing an alternate use of water that it may not be decreed for. And so we have this program for the in-stream flow. It gives us 5 out of 10 years and allows for up to 3 renewable 10-year periods. So that allows for up to 15 years of use in a 30-year period. And so we go through the process, we can boost the flow, but we can also do things like split seasons. It's not just a complete dry up of land for an entire year. It's oftentimes our projects have irrigation through June or July, and then use for in-stream flow later in the season. So it's a pretty flexible tool. And this tool also protects water users because they are actually using that water for in-stream flow. It's not a zero on their record. It allows them to keep production with a split season operation, and it allows that water to also be protected in priority. So water that's protected through a 5 and 10 temporary loan, like water that's protected through a change case, can be shepherded past a downstream headgate if that headgate is junior. It can be protected from diversion by somebody else who's junior. So that's a big difference with this, but it also comes with a much higher bar of um, entry. We have to get a CWCB approval and a Division of Water Resources approval. The whole process can take a couple of years, depending on um, how complicated it is. One of our highlight projects for this program is the Yampa River Environmental Release Project. The Yampa River gets low and warm in most summers and the temperatures rise above the levels that are safe for fish, that are prescribed to keep the fish healthy on the river. And so when the water levels drop and the temperatures climb, you may go out to Steamboat and you may see one of these signs: attention anglers, this area is closed. They can close the stretch just below Stagecoach Reservoir and the stretch down in through the town of Steamboat. And if you've been to there at Steamboat in the summer and seen like the 11 billion tubers, you can imagine what a challenge it would be to the town of Steamboat to have the river shut off to all contact. Tubers, waders, fishermen, it's a big problem. So the Water Trust leases water from Stagecoach Reservoir, which is kind of in your top left photo here, and we have it approved through a short-term temporary loan, and we can operate in 5 out of 10 years. And we lease water from the Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District to be used to meet the in-stream flow needs on the Yampa River downstream of the reservoir. And we have there's a protect rate. The minimum rate I think is 32 CFS, but we can also release up to 100 CFS, and we have released, I think the most we've ever released is 60 CFS. But we have used this program a lot, and throughout the years on this program, our releases have totaled like 50% of the flow in the Yampa at times, and our releases have kept the river from being closed for long periods of time. It actually shortened closure windows this year in a very hot, low year, and avoided some closure windows. So this is a 5 and 10 lease. And I think, am I early? I
Yep.
am a little bit early. I cut too many slides, Chelsea. Um, but that will just leave us some time for Q&A.
Thank you, Tony. If anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and then you can come off mute or put those in the chat. And Tony, if you want to stop sharing slides for a minute, that might be helpful so
Yeah,
you can see.
I'm trying to find the button. There it is. It's like on one of my 3 screens. So
Yeah, so we have about 10-15 minutes for questions for this portion of our call. Jayla.
Thanks, Chelsea. Hey, Tony, thanks for all of this great information. With the 5 and 10 temporary loan program, one quick question, just technically, does the water have to be going to a decreed in-stream flow reach? Like that has to be part of the equation?
excellent question. Yeah, I was trying to pare this talk down, so I left some stuff out. I normally talk about that, but yes, so to use the in-stream flow lease or loan tool, the 5 and 10 as we call it, you need a decreed in-stream flow rate. So if you look back at that map I showed, and if you were here for the in-stream flow decreed or the appropriated in-stream flows talk, then you understand what I'm talking about. So we are not allowed to use that tool just anywhere. Like the main stem Arkansas does not have a decreed in-stream flow, minimum in-stream flow. So I could not find an irrigator on the Arkansas and use that tool, except the state just finished rulemaking where some new laws and some new rulemaking this year that allow for release of stored water for in-stream flow use on a section of river that does not have a decreed in-stream flow. So that is wholly untested and completely brand new. We're chomping at the bit, hoping we find a project to test that tool out because it's very exciting. Great question.
Other questions? Hannah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like for the 5 and 10, since it's renewable, I'm just thinking about the Yampa where that's used so frequently. It seems like after 15 years, that's done, right?
Yeah, that is a challenge, for sure. We have some other mechanisms that we use on the Yampa to actually we've operated. I'd have to go look, but out of the last 10 years, we probably operated 8 on the Yampa. So we have some other tools that we use in conjunction with the 5 and 10. And yes, definitely the 5 and 10 uh, will, supposedly after our third renewable period, cease to be an option for us. So I won't be working here at that time, so it'll be somebody else's problem. No, it is a long ways out, but it is a concern that we have. The hope is maybe people will come around to the idea that, hey, this isn't a problem. We should keep this program and maybe take the handcuffs off of the other program. It's my hope.
Thanks. We'll go to Robert and then Melissa.
Thanks. Thanks, Tony. Great information. On the newly expanded ag water protection right, on that water, does it have to necessarily be used for a designated in-stream flow?
That is a good question. So if we were to use it for in-stream flow, because that water can be used for anything, right? So an ag water, and this is something I didn't put in my talk because it's can get a little lengthy, but an ag water protection right allows an agricultural producer to go through a quantification of their water and go through a court case to get an ag water protection right, which basically allows them to use 50%, right, Robert? 50% of their consumptive use, and they can lease that sort of to whomever they want. And if they were to lease it to the CWCB, would the CWCB need a decreed in-stream flow? I don't think anybody's asked that question, or at least come across, because we haven't had the experience with them. My guess is it would be yes. I think that would probably be the way. If someone were to try and use it for in-stream flow on a stretch without it, I think there would be a lot of resistance.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and the other thing too, I'm reaching out to CWCB to see if it would be considered a conservation program so that they wouldn't be impacting their historic consumptive use or potential abandonment as well.
Yeah. Yeah, great questions. Tell me what you find out.
Thanks. Yeah, Melissa, go for it. And then Bernadette.
Tony, I am curious, you said you guys want to work with folks that are willing at the table and interested in your programs. Can you kind of speak to best practices for other partners in working with these water users to eventually encourage them and get them to the table with CWT? And where you've seen successes there, whether it's ag or municipal?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a variety of outreach. The Water Trust does, we have what we call our request for water, where we do sort of focused outreach to general groups. But we don't because we don't want to have the appearance of targeting water users, we very much stay away from saying like, hey, everybody on this river system, you should work with us, because that can turn people off and might ruin our reputation. So we try and avoid that. However, I have been partners with Western Rivers advocates where they have done that type of focused research and focused outreach. And it has produced a project for us. And Laura and I have worked on Slater Creek project for a long time, it seems like. But we've run it 2 years in a row now, and we feel like it's a very successful and good project. So that sort of focused outreach, I think, can be really helpful, because what I'm explaining to you, I'm explaining to this group, but I doubt all the ranchers on Slater Creek have time to come and see a talk like this. And so for us to be able to, um, really get into the kitchen table and talk with people on their home turf is, I think, really valuable. And then I think water conservation programs, which I did not talk about because I will talk about them in the next section, are a really low bar, easy way to get things started. And it's not a lot of commitment, it's not a lot of challenge, it's really, I use the term gateway drug. But it's easy, you can do it quickly, and people can see if it works for them, and then hopefully when you get a project going in an area, other water users, they see that, somebody else was working on a project, it worked out for them. But it is a challenge, and there's a lot of resistance to the idea of in-stream flows that is hard to break down. So I basically said it's really hard. Sorry.
Thanks, Tony. I just want to pause. Laura, were you hoping to respond to some of that? Because maybe if you don't mind, Bernadette, I'll let Laura speak.
Yeah, I was. Thank you. Good call. Yeah, thanks, Tony. I did just want to clarify, and I don't want to make any offers on your behalf, but Tony said the water trust, it's not, they don't want to go out and start looking for water. That's just not how they operate. But that said, like, we've asked the Water Trust several times to come out to areas where we're looking to educate people about potential projects. And they have been happy to come out and really talk just purely like, these are the tools that are out there. These are some of the things that you could potentially do, and just in a very like factual manner. So I think that can really help entities if you are looking to pursue something and start educating people locally. So Tony, I'm seeing you nod, so it's okay. You guys are still willing to do that. And it's super helpful.
Yeah, and we're always happy to talk with anybody. We get calls from folks. I had a call with Friends of the Yampa, and they set up a call with us and a couple of water users and stakeholders in a community and said, hey, let's explore some options. We're always happy to do that. We just generally are not the point person for that type of work, either because of capacity or sort of political considerations, right?
Thank you. We'll take Bernadette's question, then we're going to move to the next part of this, and stick around because it's going to be really interesting.
Thanks, Tony. This talk was really helpful. Quick question for you about the Ag Water Protection Act that you were talking about a little bit earlier. Can you say a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of movement since that has gone into effect? Because it hasn't been that long. And I'm curious if the Water Trust is seeing some movement there.
Yeah, good question. So I can't remember when it went into effect, but it's been a little bit now in Division 1. And it was sort of trial ballooned in Division 1 only. And to my knowledge, there have been no takers. No one has gone through it. I think the idea was maybe a way for a municipality, instead of like buying and drying water, can partner with producers to do this, to develop a pool of leasable water that will meet needs over time, but will not be just a straight buy and dry, right? And so I don't know why that it hasn't, that sort of synthesis hasn't taken off, why those partners haven't really jumped on and utilized this tool. But as far as I know, there hasn't been a use of it yet. And then, they're currently trying to roll that out to the rest of the state. And so there have been, they're talking and listening sessions, throughout the state and all the different divisions where it's at now, getting feedback about rules and and trying to kind of like promote the program, promote the tool, right? And so we'll see once it cracks open and it starts going into into a larger geographic scope, if we start seeing that action. The Water Trust, we see some potential for this tool for sure. Largely the potential for us for that tool in Division 1 was limited because Division 1 is such a tight division. There's so much, every drop is accounted for. Water court cases. Oh, thank you, Robert. He put a great link to the ag water protection right in the chat. So for us in Division 1, it was limited, but maybe in Division 4, where it's not quite as challenging to go through a court case, that might be, or Division 5 or Division 7, that might be a place where that tool starts to make sense for us. And other water users who are maybe outside of the box of that original construct of municipality needs water, don't want to dry up farmer, right? It's like now, yeah, an in-stream flow organization wants to help protect something, how can we use this tool? And I think there's more potential there for us for flow restoration.
Thanks, Tony. Okay, let's transition to the next presentation and discussion, and I'll let Tony take the lead there.
All right. Okay. So is everyone seeing the slides? Okay, great. So I left water conservation program off of the other presentation that I just gave you, because we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive about this tool and give a local example. And one of the reasons we want to do a deep dive on this tool is we're seeing a lot of growth as from the Water Trust perspective on utilizing these tools, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So just in brief, water conservation programs are authorized by state statute as a tool that water users can use to leave water in the river and be protected from diminishment or abandonment. So it's very much like a non-diversion agreement. It's the Water Trust, in our experience, and anybody else could work with a water user and say, hey, the river that's next, that you divert from is in real bad shape. That's the Crystal River in the background of that photo there, where we have a project. And say, we'd like you not to divert starting June 1, or we'd like you not to divert when the flow in the river drops below X number of CFS. We have a lot of different ways we've utilized this tool. It's incredibly flexible. And that water is left in the stream, and that's it, except for, so just like a non-diversion agreement, except for there's protection from abandonment and diminishment written into the law. So what you need to do a water conservation program is you need to partner with a water providing entity or river or district or federal conservation program. So folks who are maybe involved in the CREP program through NRCS, if that's still a thing, I haven't kept up on that. Yeah, so you're in an NRCS program that wants you to stop irrigating and restore your riparian area for a couple of years. You could be protected under Colorado state law from diminishment if you're participating in something like that. In Colorado, in practice right now, the Colorado River District is the biggest player in this system. So anywhere within their district boundaries is where the Water Trust has utilized this tool to protect flows. And you can see their form over on the right that I can provide a link to. So what are the pros of water conservation program? Protection is key. So Senate Bill 2013-19 protects, specifically directs water court to not take into account years when a program, a water user is enrolled in operating a water conservation program. So, so that's key. And that's also something you get with our other tools, like the short-term lease tool. You're protected against diminishment or abandonment. Other pros to this, low bar of entry, right? So the application is easy. I showed you the application on this previous page. It's really not a lot longer than that. So as opposed to going through a 2-meeting CWCB process and like a 60-day comment period with the Division of Water Resources, you can put together an application for this relatively quickly and cheaply and easily. And when I say cheaply, it's because typically you don't need historic consumptive use analysis. With our other tools, you need a historic consumptive use analysis to prove that the water is there for the CWCB to lease, and that show that you're not likely not to injure any downstream users. With the water conservation program, those bars are taken away or lowered. I wouldn't say taken away. They're definitely still concerned about injury, but you can do this without spending, tens of thousands of dollars on an engineer to get your project up and running. There's no water court, and there's no DWR approval. So that both of the water court is really attractive to water users. They're like, I don't want to go to court. I want to help my river, but I don't want to go to court because I heard when you go to court, all kinds of bad stuff happens, right? So you avoid water court. You don't need DWR approval. I should probably have an asterisk there. Every one of these I've run, we have had conversations and calls with the water commissioners and the division engineers where those projects are at to make sure that they don't see any big red flags. If they're like, oh, you're going to injure Jeff, the next downstream water user, by implementing this project, they're likely to throw up some big roadblocks for us. So, but usually some analysis and some conversations can help iron out any details. And quick and timely, because there's a low bar of entry, because the applications are easy, because you don't need this massive engineering effort, you can, develop, approve, and implement a project in less than a year, which is not really what's going to happen with pretty much any of the other tools I showed you. So this is the quickest, fastest way that you could potentially put water back in stream. And then it's a sustainable solution. It's 5 out of 10 years. They're renewable 10-year periods. So, it's not an every year solution, but it could be every other year solution for the rest of your life. So these are some real big benefits from the program, right? And why it's an attractive. And one thing I don't talk about in here, but is the flexibility. Like any of our other things, we can say, split season irrigation through July. We can say, no shut off until the flow drops below 32 CFS. We can design a custom program, and as long as we can, make sure that it'll get approved, we can do basically whatever we think the stream needs and that the water user needs to make a custom program. Cons
Tony,
for
really,
water
really quick,
conservation.
Tony.
Yeah.
Adrian, I see your hand raised. If you want to wait just 5 more minutes, then Tony can take your question. That work for you, Tony?
Yeah, certainly. Water conservation program cons. There's no protection. So there was Protection, no protection. There's no protection for that water. So once that water passes the head gate, it can be picked up by the next downstream user. So that's a result of the low bar. The low bar is we're not protecting that water in stream. We're not giving it a use. Therefore, we're not going through the rigorous process necessary to do that. Therefore, that water that bypasses the river or the head gate is just free to the river. And if there's another downstream user, can use it. The water users are protected. The water is not. So it makes location critical to effectiveness, right? You don't want to try and use a water conservation program in a stretch of the Pooter where there's like 36 different diversions in the next mile, right? The program I alluded to that where we work with WRA is on Slater Creek, and there's the 3 diversions we work on in the headwaters of Slater Creek, and then no diversions for like 20 miles. So it's pretty given that the water is going to stay in the river and keep on heading downstream. It's an unknown program. I haven't enacted one of these yet, although we're getting better, where I haven't had to do a lot of sort of back and forth with DWR, with the partners, with other water users in the neighborhood, explaining what this tool is and how it's used, and trying to make sure that DWR effectively records in their diversion records a comment that says participating in a water conservation program. It's always like the first time we do it, we got to kind of jump through a bunch of hoops. Hopefully, once we do it once, then people know. Limited availability. So water conservation programs are not authorized in Division 7. So all you folks down there in the Southwest, I'm sorry. Although the Southwest River District is always talking about potentially allowing it. And I think that they're the entity that kind of gets to say whether or not it'll happen. So if you know anybody in the Southwest District, tell them you want a water conservation program. Not all water authorities have programs. So the River District has stood up a program. They have an application. They have a staff member who is Brendan Langenheisen, by the way. He's awesome, super great guy to work with. Who is there to take care of these programs, to authorize them, to take them through an administrative process. Not besides the River District, up until just a little while ago, they were the only group that had this anywhere else in the state. So if you're trying this in someplace that's not the River District location, or not within the River District boundaries, you're going to have to figure out somebody else to do it. Some recent changes. The Upper Arkansas River District just stood up a program last year, in part because of a project that we're working on. And then we utilized the CWCB to authorize a water conservation program on a river in northern Larimer County, on a creek in northern Larimer County just recently. So the CWCB is a potential option anywhere you live, except for Division 7. But yeah, it's just not everybody has them. So moving on to the Vail Ditch Water Conservation Program. So who is it? We, the Water Trust, have worked with 2 separate water user groups on the Vail Ditch, which is in the Fraser River Basin. This map is about the best I could find right now, but the Fraser River is flowing from south to north in this map. The town of Fraser, Tabernash, the town of Winter Park here. And the Vail Ditch owns storage in Meadow Creek Reservoir, which is this red circle in the top right of the map. In the late season, and during the early season, they directly divert out of the river to get their irrigation flows. In the late season, they tap into their stored water and bring it down and divert it for late season irrigation. What we have done is worked with them to utilize some of that stored water in the late season, and instead of running it down and getting like a second cutting of hay on their property or on the acres that are irrigated by those particular shares, they're going down from Meadow Creek Reservoir, and Denver Water, which all of these red triangles are diversions by Denver Water in the Fraser River Basin. And they all drain to the Moffett Tunnel, go under the Continental Divide, and go to Denver Water. So that is in part some of the reason why this project is important, because flows are lower on the Fraser than they would be without those diversions by Denver Water. Temperatures get warmer. And so we work though with Denver Water to run this water down from Meadow Creek Reservoir. Denver Water picks it up at its Meadow Creek system instead of it going on down to the Vail Ditch, which is kind of under the legend over here. And they run that water, they pick that water up there, and in exchange, they reduce diversions at one of these other diversions in the headwaters of the Fraser River. And so that allows clean, cool water to more clean, cool water to flow down a longer section of the Fraser River, and keep the stream temperatures lower. And that effect is better than if the water just came down Willow Creek, or no, not Willow Creek, Meadow Creek, sorry. If it just came down Meadow Creek down and hit the Fraser at Tabernash, you're already missing all these miles where that water could have had benefit. So we're able to utilize the infrastructure of Denver Water, exchange the water upstream, and improve stream flow conditions. So the benefits to the river, those exchange flows can help keep temperatures cool for a long reach during the hot periods of the summer. So we've done releases in coordination with Learning by Doing, which is an organization that's trying to kind of adaptively manage the Fraser River system for environmental benefit. So we've worked with them to drop these flows out of the reservoir and exchange them up so that we keep the river cool in the middle of the hot summer. Or this last season, we didn't end up with a really hot spell, and we were able to exchange them to step down Denver Water. There's in-stream flow sections on all these rivers. And so Denver Water, and they're usually two stages. There's a summer flow and a winter flow, and they go from like 8 CFS to 3 CFS. And Denver Water on September 15th, when the decree changes, will go from allowing 8 CFS past its head gate to 3 CFS past its head gate. And then you get this really steep drop in the river, which can strand fish, cause migration issues. It's just generally not best practice. So this year we were able to use that water to step down their reductions, instead of just going like a 60% change in flow in one day. We were able to achieve that same change in flow over a week. Benefits to the river, there are multiple shareholders, and we have multiple water conservation programs approved through the River District, one for each shareholder. So by having multiple shareholders and multiple approvals, we can operate this program in 10 out of 10 years conceivably. Will the river need it every 10 years? Will the water users want to do that every year? We don't know. That's every year we kind of got to see what people are thinking and what we should do. But we have that potential. So it's not only it's not only a temporary benefit, it's a long-term potential solution to this issue of high temperatures with these water rights that we can use to kind of alleviate that. Benefits to the water users. They're getting financially compensated. They're using it to cover their assessment fees. They're funding their O&M backlog. They were, I went out there and took a site visit, and they had, installed new measurement equipment. They had lined a section of ditch. And it had really helped them catch up. That their system is insane, and it takes water from Meadow Creek over to another creek and then over to it's miles of ditch. They need a lot of money to keep that thing running. So the money that comes in from the leases of this water helps them keep up and get ahead on their backlog. And then it's a split season operation. Like I said before, this isn't binary. It isn't say, we're protecting the river and the stream. You have to go dry for an entire year. They still use their surface water flows every year until they run out, usually sometime in July or August. And then this just taps into a small portion of their stored water. And so some fields are not getting a second cutting. some fields are not getting late season irrigation due to this, but they're still getting early season and midsummer irrigation. So that is all I've got on that program, because we're going to bring up Rebecca and have a little Q&A session.
Thanks, Tony.
Already on time. A little early.
Yeah, and do you need your slides, or it might be good to
No, I'll
share
stop
them?
the share here.
And if there was that one specific question from Adrian, we might just answer that, but
Oh
then
yeah, right,
the
of course.
Q&A, if you're still here, Adrian.
Yeah. Hi, sorry. There's some construction work going on in the house right now. I don't know if you could hear that in the background, but yeah, Tony, apologies if I missed this earlier on, or if this is just like a really ignorant question, but who is providing that financial compensation to the water users in those water conservation programs? Is that the agency that is authorized to stand up those programs?
So yeah, there's a couple of different sources. Usually, the first funder is the Water Trust. We act as the lessee in all of these projects. But when we're utilizing state CWCB tools like the short-term lease and loan, we can actually utilize a pot of state funding for those leases and loans. And so we love the leases and loans because we don't have to fundraise for that. When it comes to the water conservation programs, no, the River District is not funding these. As much as we love the River District, we are not expecting them, and they are not funding these projects. They're just simply authorizing the use, the operation of the project. So the watershed, in the case of these water conservation programs, the Water Trust is fundraising for these funds. So it puts a bigger burden on us. So we get all these benefits of the flexibility, we get the benefits of the low bar, all of that great stuff, but then we have to figure out how to pay for it. So luckily we have a really awesome development staff at ART, and they just knock it out of the park every year. And lots of people are tributaries. You could become one too. Just go to our website. So yeah, that's the long and short of it. If we're utilizing a state program, we can access state pots of money. If we're not, then it's whatever organization. So if you were a organization thinking about getting a water conservation program, you better figure out how you can pay for it.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
For this section, Tony and Rebecca are going to have a little dialogue, and then we will have time for more Q&A in just a bit, but I'm going to pass it back to Tony and Rebecca.
All right. So Rebecca is with the Grand County Mutual Ditch and Reservoir Company, and she is also with the Colorado River District. The GCG, oh God, I can never remember.
GCMDRC. It's quite a mouthful of an acronym.
They are a shareholder on the Vail Ditch system, and they participated in this water conservation program with us this year. They're not the first water users, like I said, there are multiple. And so the Grand County Irrigated Land Company has also participated in this program with us under a separate authorization for the previous 2 years. And then Rebecca and her organization partnered with us to operate this year. And so we just have some questions we're going to ask, kind of a little back and forth, and then we'll open it up for questions for everybody at the end. So Rebecca, from your standpoint as like a project partner, as a water user, what were the strengths of utilizing this tool in this process?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And thanks for having me on this conversation today to be able to provide our insight. We were really happy to be able to use this program. This organization, the GCMDRC, we're a shareholder within Grand County Irrigated Land Company, and the River District is one of those entities within that organization. But we have been really struggling for many, many years, for about 15 years since the GCMDRC was established, to do that temporary loan, that one of the tools that Tony talked about earlier that has that much higher bar. And we've been working through that historical consumptive use analysis, but it's a pretty tedious and long process, and we hadn't had success with it. And so we saw another user with the Irrigated Land Company using that water conservation program tool and thought, well, that's a much lower bar. Let's try that. And so for us, the strength was really being able to utilize it with a much lower bar and being able to get something done instead of continuing to spin our wheels. And then working with the Water Trust was also a really great strength because we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. We were able to use the examples the Water Trust had from working with the Irrigated Land Company the previous 2 years and doing it. And that was just an incredible strength to have Tony and his support there to get that project through this year.
And for the record, we did pay them, so you can discount all of the praise that she's giving me.
Yeah, and the financial support was definitely impactful. We needed that for the project to succeed as well.
So from your perspective, what were the challenges with the process? Because I know we definitely had some. So yeah, let me know how you feel about that, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of spoke to it earlier, Tony, too, saying that, it's not a very well-known program. And I think, especially in these, in the ditch company, we're not the only shareholder on that ditch. And so when we are coming to the board to say, hey, we'd really like to use our water shares for an in-stream flow purpose, there's kind of some justifiable fear with that request. And so communication was a really necessary tool for us to get past some of those challenges, because there was just kind of challenges in understanding what we were trying to do, and challenges in explaining the program and explaining how it was going to impact the stream, but that we weren't going to injure water rights holders within the land company. And so we had some challenges just with navigating those conversations and making sure that everybody was on board with what we were gonna do this year.
What's the long-term impact from you as a shareholder from the ditch, from the ditch or implementation perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we've, as I mentioned, we've been trying to do a in-stream flow program, put some of our shares towards that for 15 years and haven't been able to until this year. So that was really huge. Our organization kind of has a two-part mission in that we want to be able to support agriculture, and then we also want to be able to use our water shares for not only ag, but also for some of those late season mitigating late season issues with high temperatures and low flows in the Fraser. And so to finally be able to do that this year does have a long-term impact, using those releases for the stream. And, as Tony mentioned as well, I think, being able to use our program 5 and 10 years, but also to be able to collaborate with the other water users on the Irrigated Land Company that have a water conservation program and maybe, do one each year, but from a different program will enable us to use that 10 out of 10 years and really have a great long-term impact on the stream while also not diminishing our diversion records and not taking a zero for not using our water for its decreed use.
Excellent. I think we touched on this a little bit, but was it a difficult tool to understand? And were there's messaging or communication things that we could be improved as moving forward, or that you would suggest to somebody who's trying to go down this road?
Yeah, I think it's an easy tool to understand. It's just not well known yet. As you kind of mentioned too, like working with the division engineer and the water commissioners was also a part of it. They're not always familiar with this tool and this program. And so I think it's not difficult to understand, but there is a messaging component of getting that information out there that we're all still kind of working on. And I think, for our purposes and for us working with this project, it was really great to, have the Water Trust helping us, because instead of just kind of redoing our whole program or we're starting from scratch on developing our program, we were able to look at the example water conservation program that was already done with different water users in our irrigation company and kind of tailor it off of that. So it made it really easy to be able to, not have to reinvent the wheel and just kind of copy that program and do essentially the same thing with different water shares. But yeah, I think the communication is really key.
What advice do you have for another group, another, water user who would be looking to implement a project like this?
Start early. It is it is definitely a lower bar than doing the temporary loan program, and it doesn't take, years and years to get through. But I think, especially if it's part of a ditch company where you're not the only water user, starting to have those conversations early to explain what the water conservation program is and why you're trying to do it is really important. I don't know that we would have been successful with navigating some of those conversations this year if it hadn't already been done within our irrigated land company, just because of some of those fears and misconceptions of what we were trying to do. And so starting early to talk about what it is and have those conversations and make sure that everyone's fears and concerns are addressed, and you can have more success and not deal with some of that maybe at the last minute when you're ready to go and want to be doing your water releases, but you haven't gotten full approval and everyone on board. So start early with that communication.
And I'll put in a plug for Brendan here at the River District. He is the one person dealing with these, and that's not his only job. He's dealing with a ton of other things, including Shoshone stuff this summer. When we were trying to like get this past him and another water conservation program, and I felt so bad that pestering him about it because he was super duper busy. So the earlier you can be on board and have an application in front of Brendan, the easier his life will be.
Yeah, I probably abused my proximity going down to his office and bugging him about it a couple times.
I think that's like all of the questions that we had sort of written up. Anything else? Any final thoughts you want to go to before we open it up for questions?
No, I'm happy to open it up to questions.
Yeah, so just like before, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. I am going to put our evaluation form in the chat in case you peel off early. Please do that evaluation. And anyway, open it up for questions. Jayla.
I've got a bunch of questions, but I'm going to try to narrow it down. So, Tony, I'm curious how you go about determining the amount of compensation for whether it's for leases or non-diversion agreements or the conservation program. What does that process look like to figure out what is the right amount for the water user and for the water trust, to make that fair arrangement?
Awesome. I love how you phrase that because I usually get that question where it's like, how much will you pay me? And I'm like, I don't know yet. Depending on the tool, if we're going through anything with the CWCB that needs CWCB approval, we are then basically asking for money, asking for the state to enter into a lease contract, and the state has to have a pretty firm idea of the value of what they're getting is fair market value, right? So when it comes to those tools, we will hire a professional water valuation done. West Water, we've had LRE Water do them, and they will go through a full bore, process and say, give us a range of X many dollars per acre foot, and then it's usually a bit of negotiation with the water user to come to the final number. When it comes to the water conservation programs, again, that's a little bit of a lower bar. So we could still do that process, but that again, a couple of things about that. If you do that, the valuation process is most often based off of a historic consumptive use analysis. So if you're doing evaluation, then you might ultimately just have to do an HCU as well. And then you're kind of like, well, we're losing some of that flexibility or that nimbleness of the tool, right? That low bar of entry. It becomes more expensive for the water trust to pay for those contractors, that sort of thing. So, depending on where we're at, some places there's already a pretty well established market of like, you know, this reservoir leases this water at 50 acre feet, $50 an acre foot, right? And we kind of go with those existing numbers. Sometimes we're just kind of, you know, in a back and forth negotiation with the water user. We have done enough things over time that we have a bracket of what we understand. And then there's also kind of what we can convince our funders to pay us per acre foot, right? Because ultimately that's where we get our money. And so we're going to our funders and saying, hey, we got this great project. They want, you know, $6,000 an acre foot. And that it would be like, no, they're not going to pay that much. So it's a bit of a three-way negotiation, but usually our negotiation with the funders is very much in line with what, you know, we've already kind of figured out with our project partners. But, you know, it can get as detailed as you want, or it can be as mellow as you want. I think Rebecca, you know, and the folks on Vail Ditch felt like they came up with a fair number that was going to do good things for their you know, pay for their assessment, help them get ahead on O&M costs. And whether that was a straight market rate, like if they could have sold that water to Denver, what would Denver have paid? That's not how that went. You know, it was more about what's the value of the water to them and what's the crop loss, you know, that they would see, and where does that balance get struck? And Rebecca, you might want to talk more about that if you have a perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it was really important to be able to cover those assessment costs. We you know, our board wasn't going to approve it if we were losing money. So that was a really important component. And since it was a split season, we were still able to, you know, support agriculture in the first part of the season as well. And so that was, yeah, kind of a win-win.
Thank you. Any other questions out there? I might ask a question then. Rebecca, since you've gone through this process with Colorado Water Trust, are you looking forward to trying to implement this kind of program in other areas?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. You know, this one was kind of an easy one, just since we're part of this organization within Grand County and we're a board member for that. I think I'm probably going to focus on that. The harder tool, the higher bar in-stream temporary loan, see if we can get that through. I think, you know, as Tony mentioned, this being a gateway drug, it's kind of a good first stepping stone to show other water users on the ditch that this can work, and you're not, you know, we can do it in a way that's not going to damage anyone else's ability to get water. So my next step is to try to do the higher bar project and get those flows protected. So yeah.
Jayla, do you have any more questions?
I do. I'm trying to make space right now,
Sure,
but
sure.
if no one else has a question, I was curious to hear more from Rebecca when you were talking about just navigating the fears and concerns that you were hearing from other ditch company owners, or that you might experience elsewhere when you're looking at these kinds of projects. You know, what are the main things that you're hearing and experiencing from people, and how did you communicate with them about those fears and concerns to try to make them more comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of in it's a little bit of a weird position because, you know, our organization, which owns shares, is made up of all of these different entities. That includes, you know, towns in Grand County, the Grand County, the River District, but we're not people who are, you know, irrigating lands on the Granby Mesa, and all of the other water owners, or, you know, water shareholders are. And so they are kind of a tight-knit community. They all know each other. And then we're coming in and being like, okay, well, we own 28% of the shares and we want to use our water in this way. Kind of obviously raises some red flags for them, right? They don't interact with us on a day-to-day basis. And so for us, a really big first step was let's just show up and get to know these people. Let's be at the shareholder meetings. Let's make sure that we're having conversations with them. Let's lease some of our extra shares to some of these, other shareholders who may need additional water shares occasionally. So that was a big first step. And then, we've also just tried to meet with them frequently to talk about what we want to do. We met with them this year to talk about our water conservation program plan, but it wasn't the first time we had met with them to say, here's our mission for our organization. We're not coming in and, trying to sell our water rights to put up a new home development, next door to you. We're just trying to use our shares for agriculture and for in-stream flow purposes. So we've had many, many meetings with them to even just taking steps back to say who we are and why we're there. And so it's a slow process sometimes, but it's a lot of relationship building, I think.
Great. Well, with 2 minutes for the end of our call, I think I'm going to have us call it. And I just really want to thank Tony and Rebecca for being here and sharing about the programs and about your experience participating in a program like this. And thanks everybody for your participation in our call. I'll send out the resources for this in the next few days. And we hope to see you at an upcoming call. So thank you so much.
And if you ever need to talk about this stuff, call us up at the Water Trust. We're always happy to chat. There's a lot of dense information here. Always happy to chat in person. Thank you all.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea and Tony and Rebecca.
Thanks everyone.